Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the live stream of Let's Code Elixir. The first take had a little bit of audio issues, so I just deleted and decided to start over. People were complaining that they couldn't hear me, so sorry about that. I don't know what happened, but I hope you guys can hear me now. Anyway, let's get started. So what I'm gonna do in this episode is let's first take a look at what we have here in the code. So let me see here. Um, all right. I hope you guys can see that. So basically, we had this project from the previous episode. And so what we're going to do is we're going to do a continuation of this. And so even though we already have some kind of like a basic project, this is not very fun to work with because every time we start the app, it kind of like we have to start over and we start from scratch, and this is kind of like hard coded. It would be nice to have the ability to kind of like persist this to some kind of a file. So I don't want to jump the gun here and go straight to working with databases. So what we're going to do is we're going to do something in between. So I'm going to show you guys how to actually work with files, which is why this episode is titled Working with Files. So right now, let me just boot up the app and just do it IEX-S mix. So if I do games.all games, here you'll see we kind of like listing out all the games that we have here that we hard coded, and we can add the game as well, to the list. But I already kind of like demoed this in the previous episode, so I'm not gonna do that again. You can see the code right here. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add some kind of like a basic persistent layer, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use the basic file API in Elixir to do all this work. So I'm not going to use any library because quite frankly, we don't need to, because Elixir standard library is already very well made, and it covers pretty much whatever we need in order to work with files. So basically, this file API here is just, it's on the official standard documentation. So if you're curious, go ahead and read it. So I'm going to be doing some referencing off of this. So most of this is pretty unprepared. I'm just going to show you how I solve problems. So like I'll start working on something, and then I'll have something that I want in my head. Like in this case, I want to write to a file. And then, my thought process is going to be something like, well, we don't have a file, right? Like if we look at the code over here, like we don't have a file to start with. So initially, how are we going to solve that problem? So we're going to solve that problem by we're going to actually create a file. So we're going to try and check to see if we have a file, the file that we're going to use to work with. And then if we don't have it, we'll create it. If we have it, we'll load it, and then we'll continue to use the same file. So we probably need some kind of mechanism to kind of like check if we have a file. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to remove all of this hard-coded data over here to start, and then the easiest thing I can do is I'm going to change this module name to db path. So I'm going to use something like games.bin. Bin stands for binary. So basically what we're going to be doing is we're going to write Erlang binary straight to the file. So before I go ahead, let me just check my live stream to see if it's working right. Seems to be okay. Stream health is good. All right. Okay, so that's fine. Everything seems to be working fine. So by the way, if you are liking what you're seeing here, please give us a like and also add a comment to let us know, how you feel. Like, is this content helpful for you? And if you have any feedback, let us know. We're always trying to improve. I saw some people before, they were complaining about that there's no audio, so I decided to start over. Anyway, so what I'm going to do here is I am going to just start working on this project now. So I'm going to head over into the code over here. We already have a file name that we want to use. So why don't we actually write the first logic? Right now, if I just do something like a File.read, and then I put db path, right? So when you have a file, you want to read it. So let's just start with that and see what error comes out. This is going to give us an error, obviously, because we don't have that file to read from. So I'm going to do iex -s mix, and I'm going to do games.all games, and then bam, we're going to get could not read file games.bin. Okay, fine, no problem. So what we're going to do is we're going to write a function here called load or create. That's fine. That's good enough. Then we're going to check if we file.exists. And then we're going to have a db path, right? We're going to put the same path into here. And then if we have the file, what we're going to do is we're just going to read from it. So I'm going to do a file.read and then db path. And if not, right, if we don't have the file, so what we're going to do is we're going to do a File.write. So if you look at the API for File.write, it says you need to give it the path. Fine, we know the path. We've got the db path over here. But the content, the initial content needs to be there. So before I go ahead, I'm going to show you guys a cool trick. So in Erlang, in Elixir, you can use Erlang functions. So there's a function in Erlang called term to binary. So what we can do is we can say like an empty list here, and then we can do something like that, and it'll output the binary representation of the native Erlang data structure. In this case is the empty list that we're going to use to write to the initial file if we don't have anything. If we do, we're going to read it. If we don't, we're going to write a new file. So then we're going to do db path, and then here we're going to do Erlang dot term to binary, and then we're going to write just an empty list, just like that. So I'm going to close this out, and I'm going to try and start the server again, start the app again, and I'm going to try and run games.load or create. Bam. So it actually returned okay. That's pretty cool. So actually, if you see here, you can see that I already have a file. So this is kind of like the binary representation of an empty file. So what happens now if I call load or create? So let's try it out. So I'm gonna go over here, and then I'm gonna do a games.load or create. So I'm going to get the binary representation. So what we actually want to do is convert this back into the native data structure, the Erlang, the Elixir native data structure, which is in the empty list. So how do we do that? Well, let's use the opposite. So before we use Erlang dot term to binary, right? That gives us the same thing. So what we can now do is, let's say Erlang binary to term. You guessed it, right? I hope you guessed it. So yeah, obviously we're gonna get back that same empty list, because all we're doing is we're just converting it back into the native data structure, the native list over here. All right, so here we have, we're going to write the file, right? And then if we don't have the file, if we have the file, we're just going to read it. But we need to make sure that it's also wrapped around the Erlang dot binary to term. So now this makes sure that when we read the data from the file, it gets converted into the empty list that we want to start off with. So starting value. So here, starting value, I'm going to put it as an empty list. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put here the starting value, and then I'm going to return the starting value here. So every time we call this function, we will always get the actual starting value if we don't have the file. That's the logic that I'm going for here. So there is a consistency in our function, is that if I call load or create, I know I'm either going to get an empty list to start off and it's going to write to the file, or it's going to read an existing file, right? So the logic is that I'm always going to get the exact thing that I need. So if I'm starting from scratch, I'll get an empty list, or I'm getting something from an existing file. So I guess that's what that load and create function does. So I'm going to close this out and I'm going to call the function again. So games dot load or create. And then so that should always return me either an empty list or an existing list. So yeah, now in this case, the games.bin already exists. So I'm going to get an empty list, right? Which is fine, which is exactly what I'm looking for. All right, so now what we need to do is we need to call the all games. So all games should automatically by default load or create this file, right? It should load it should call the load or create instead of just reading the DB path. Like, I mean, if we don't have anything in the file, it should just return an empty list, right? So that makes sense. So what we can actually do is we can actually make this into a private function because we don't actually need to call this directly. We should use a public API, which is the all games, right? So now we're covering a little bit about private APIs, private functions. So generally, you want to use a private function when you do not want to expose a certain function, like something which is like low level, like working with files. You don't want to expose that to the developer who's calling your library or your program or whatever. So you want to hide that away, and that's the way to do it. All right, so here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this load or create. So load or create. And then basically now I should be able to do something like games dot all games. Wonderful. So now I get a list. So the next thing I want to do, right, is I want to be able to load all of the games. So instead of here of just using the constant from before, now I'm going to use all games function. So if this returns me an empty list, fine, right? But what we're going to do is we're going to get this new list out when we add, right? But it's not going to write anything to the file. So what we have to do here is we have to do File.write. Actually, let me just, before I even do the File.write to add, I'm going to do it here. So I'm going to show you what happens. So if I do games.add, and then here I'm going to do like the map, right? I want to write to the map. So I'm going to do name Resident Evil 3. Producer is Capcom. The year is 2020, right? So now I actually got return a list. But what I want to do is I actually want to get more than just return a list. I actually want to write to the file that I already have, right? So what I can do now is, so this is the added games. So maybe I'll call it something like new items, new list, I guess. That's fine. And then what I'm going to do here is a File.write. And then I'm going to call the DB path. And then I'm going to, instead of using the Erlang term to library with the starting value, I'm going to do Erlang dot term to binary, with the new list. And then I'm going to return the new list. So actually, after I call this particular function, it should add this file will change, right? So let's try it out. So I'm going to go over here and then I'm going to do a let's call games.add, and then here I'm going to do a name Resident Evil 3, and then I'm going to do a producer Capcom. The year is 2020, Right. So that I think worked. Everything worked out. So I'm gonna check out the games.bit, and you can see that this binary actually changed. You can actually see it. So now, technically, if I close this application and I call all games, I should see my game in there, right? I should see this return exactly as it was before. So nothing is hard coded. The only thing that's hard coded is the path to the file now, right? So I'm gonna load up the file again. So I'm gonna IEX S mix. I'm gonna load up the project, and I'm gonna do games.all games. Wow, wonderful! Look at that, just like magic. So I'm able to actually persist data to a file, and I'm actually able to retrieve it. That's just super cool. So we can take this even further. Like, for example, now if I call add games.add, I can actually type whatever data I want in here. There's actually no validation. The data structure can be all over the place. So I like whatever I write, like something like, you know, blah, blah, right? I mean, ideally it would be nice to have some kind of validation that, okay, you gotta fill out the producer, and you gotta fill out the year and all that stuff, right? That's what a database does, right? You can have kind of like a column of the data structure that you want, and then the user can then put in the data correctly. What if we wanted to replicate it, some kind of you know data structure, enforce some kind of data structure to our file? That's what I'm going to be covering in the next episode. I mean, this episode here was just so we could see, kind of like the starting of a real application where you can write to a file, you can load from a file, and then you can see how the persistent layer actually works. In the most simple sense, really. Like, this is, as simple as it's going to get. And we did it all with just using a few different functions from the standard API. So if you want to learn more about what can be done with files, you can see there's like setting permissions and checking stats and copying and making directory and all sorts of stuff. So give this video a like if you like it, if you found it useful. I hope you guys and girls enjoyed that and found it useful. And also give us a comment so that YouTube's algorithm picks it up and shares it with the whole world, so the whole world can learn Elixir programming. I don't know if they need to, but I mean, I think that it's something that a lot of people may want to learn at this point in time, because everyone's home, and I see people baking and making food, and coding is just one of those activities you can do in the comforts of your own home, and you don't have to interact with anyone. You can social distance and code very safely. So yeah, you can definitely do that, and it'll work out great for everyone. And who knows, after the end of this thing, can apply for a job. So if you're looking for a programming job, you can apply at dmoney.com. That's the company that I'm a CTO at. And we're always looking for talent, especially Elixir talent. So take a look at dmoney.com and send us your CV. And then, we'll go from there. All right. So with that out of the way, I hope you guys like this video, and, give us a like and comment on YouTube so that, it can be shared, as I already mentioned. So with that, I'm going to sign off. Thank you